I'm Rajiv Ranjan, VP Outreach of Babson Consulting Club. On behalf of the club, I am extremely happy to welcome you all for this much awaited consulting panel event. And we will have a brief introduction about our club. As you know, Babson Consulting Club is dedicated to educating students on the practice of consulting, facilitating alumni network, and helping students understand the various opportunities at post Babson. We will be taking up this mission by providing training in case interviews, organizing network events, and information sessions. The club aims at bridging the gap between pre-Babson studies and entering the field of consulting. Next slide, Jan. Yeah, and here is our leadership team. We will have a short introduction from our members. We can start with Plague.
Hi, everybody. I'm Parak Duna. I'm one of the presidents of the Consulting Club. I'm in the 2-year program in my second year, graduating this spring. Next will be Yanni.
Yanni, you are muted.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Yani Lu, second year MBA in Babson. So I graduate in this May. Very happy to meet you guys here. Again, today is Chinese New Year, so 新年快乐. 新年快乐. The next is Deepa.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Deepak Panjwani, the president of partnerships of the Consulting Club in the 2-year MBA program, graduating this semester as well. Abhishek, on to you.
Thank you, Deepak. So, hi everyone. I'm Abhishek Patania. I'm a first-year MBA at Babson, and I am VP of first years. So, any doubts or any suggestions you are having regarding what kind of events we would conduct, you could reach out to me, and we would try to include that in our further events. Thank you. Next is Paige.
Thank you, Abhishek. My name is Paige Hughes, and I'm in the MSEL program. I'll be graduating in May, and I am the VP of Marketing, and it's great to see you all here tonight.
Okay, we can have next slide. Yeah, so today we have Babson alums as our panelists who will be sharing their stories with us. And they have tons of experience and knowledge in the consulting industry, functions, and beyond. They are the living example of the fact that distance between you and everything you want is the amount of action you take. So moving forward, let me introduce our guests. We have Jeremy Hill, senior consultant from Altman Solon, Neil Leave, management consultant from Convergence Consulting, and Reed Ataya, organization and transformation analyst from PA Consulting. Today, Deepak Punjwani will be navigating the discussion and Q&A further. I am super excited about the conversation we will get to have today. And Deepak, over to you now.
Thank you, Rajiv. Welcome, everyone, and a big Babson welcome to our panelists. So the aim of today's session is just to have a frank, open discussion about what it takes to be a consultant. And we just want everyone to walk out of here better than they walked in, with a better knowledge of what consulting is about. And, just have a very casual, frank, open discussion. So I think we can get into it. I'd like to ask the panelists the first question, which is, what were you doing prior to consulting with your MBA program or prior to your MBA program? If you guys could just share a little bit about yourselves. Jeremy, if you want to start.
Sure. Thank you guys very much for having me. It's nice to be involved, if not back on campus, and I appreciate the invitation. Rajiv said that there's tons of experience here, and I have all of 7 months of consulting experience, so it's great to be included. Prior to the MBA, I had actually just been laid off, which was sort of like the nail in the coffin of, okay, I am not in the space I need to be in the career path that I was in at the time. so it was a great push in the direction of making a pivot. And I was definitely interested in consulting from the very beginning, and saw an MBA as a path into this field.
Awesome. Thank you. Mile, if you want to go next.
Yeah, again, thank you for having us. Just to Jeremy's point, it's nice to be back on campus, even virtually these days. So I guess before the MBA, I was an entrepreneur. I had spent most of my years in food and beverage, and then at the time I was living in New York, and I saw wine importing as a viable business opportunity. And unfortunately, things didn't kind of go according to plan, but that experience alone allowed me to realize that I needed to buff up my business skill set. And looking for a place to go, Babson was the number one.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Raid, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, same as Jeremy here. I mean, ton of experience. I've been all of 5 months in the consulting industry now, so straight out of school. I did get exposed to consulting during my undergrad first, where I had about a 7 months internship during my last semester, and that's when I kind of first got exposed to it. But it's been straight school, like undergrad business school. I graduated from MSCL in May and started in September. So,
Congrats.
Awesome.
thank you.
Just a note. If any of you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box, and we'll get to them. So, Raid, you mentioned how you were exposed to consulting, right? How you, in your undergrad. How did you break into consulting though after your MBA?
I would say just really, I mean, you have to focus on when they have their application process, right? So consulting is one of those industries that's a little bit irregular in terms of when they have them, right? Usually when you think about jobs, you don't really think about it like close to a year in advance. But consulting, you really have to know that if you want to go into it or not, because applications are usually due like September, October, the year before you're joining. So at the start of the MSCL program for me, I had to decide whether or not I wanted to go back into consulting or not. And I decided I wanted to. So like you have to take into account that early process. And then you just network a ton, and through networking and a lot of preparation for the interviews, and then you get back into it.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Jeremy and Mile, did you guys have any experience with consulting prior, or when did you? How did you get into consulting, basically? Right? How do you learn about what consulting is? Because a lot of our people who join the clubs, they don't know what consulting is. So
Yep.
yeah, so we'd like to hear your point of view also.
Jeremy, do you want to go first?
Sure. So the number one, I guess, thing I knew about consulting prior to getting into the industry was it's the type of place where you learn twice as fast as any other job, right? So that's one of the things that definitely drew me to it. And Raid's right in terms of the application process, and that's what it was like for me. I was in the 1-year program, so I actually had to practice interviewing basically when I started taking classes the summer prior to graduating, because it was summer to summer type of an experience for me with the MBA program. And so I did trust the process a little bit. I cheated by practicing a ton and networking. And I would certainly vouch for the effectiveness of the different tools that you hear about, the books like Case in Point, the Victor Cheng materials, anything that you can find, absorb, build a shortcut in terms of the interview process and help yourself prepare, because that's how I broke into it, was really just the interview process and networking. The experience in being in this space, it's definitely a very rewarding, very interesting place to be. And I mean, like the learning experience, I think is the number one takeaway I've gotten so far.
Yeah, yeah, and just to build on that, I was attracted to the learning curve as well, right? I knew very little about consulting going into the MBA, but the consulting club is where I learned a lot about the industry, a lot about the nature of the work, and it's interesting because I actually landed my job through a connection from the consulting club. I met someone who was in the part-time program, who was working with the firm at the time, which was still a startup. Then he had moved on to something else, introduced me to the managing partner. One thing led to another. And here I am almost 2 years with the firm. So, the consulting club really is a place where not only that you learn about the industry, but it's an outstanding opportunity to network and land your next opportunity.
Awesome. Great answers. So one thing I'm seeing that is common in all your answers is the importance of networking. And
Yep.
for a lot of students, including myself, right, it brings in a lot of anxiety. It's basically because we haven't really networked before. We haven't really understood the importance of networking. And it just feels like a very one-sided deal. Like when you network, you're literally, as a student, asking for help. You're not providing anything else in return. And that is something which really dissuades people from trying to network, that it feels very one-sided. Do you guys have any tips to make that whole process easier for someone who's going out there and trying to network?
I can start
Sure.
first because I was doing that not too long ago. I just want to flip the narrative a little bit on what you just said. So I view consulting a little bit more as meeting people. All students have done that before, right? You meet people all the time. You just started MBA's program or just meet new people at clubs or events or things like that. So it's not that much different. And I would say all you have to do is like be genuine, be interested in what people do, really just get engaged with the conversation that you're having at the moment, and don't really expect anything. Like networking events aren't there for you to ask for help. If you make a genuine connection, if you connect with someone on like a personal level and you're curious about what they do, you ask the right questions, that help and that connection will come later to them offering you like assistance in what you do, right? So I wouldn't view it as you're going to the event to ask help. View it more as you're going to meet new people, and how am I going to make a connection that will last beyond that 1 hour event or 2 hour event that I'm meeting that person, and how will they remember me? I don't think people remember you if you straight away ask them for help, right? They're gonna remember you if you have a really good conversation and both parties walk out of that conversation saying, "Oh wow, I really like what we just talked about. I learned a lot from that conversation. I want to keep in touch with that person and take that relationship further."
That's an excellent answer. Do you guys have anything else to add? Jeremy, Mila?
I'll go.
Yeah,
I'll
why
go
don't you go
first
ahead
this
and
time
do
if you
that,
want.
Tom?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I totally understand, right? Networking can be intimidating, particularly when you have a group of international students, a lot of mixing cultures, and depends on your background. If you haven't had a lot of client-facing or customer exposure opportunities in your previous career, it'll be challenging. But I think just for me, it kind of came natural. I didn't overthought things. I didn't put too much pressure on myself. You just try to make a genuine connection, just like it said. And I guess the bigger or the biggest takeaway or advice I would say is try to add value to your other side. It's not a one-way street; it's a two-way street. So that's asking someone for help straight out. I don't think that's gonna cut it. Everyone will tell you that. So that value both ways street. Keep that away.
Agreed.
Yeah, I'd agree with what both is it Raid or Reed?
It's right.
Right. Both what Rayed and Mila said, and I'll add a few things because I had a background in sales prior to the MBA, and in many ways, networking is selling yourself a little bit. You definitely want to look for opportunities for that genuine, true connection, build a relationship. You absolutely should look for where you can offer value. And remember that as graduate students, you're not 17, 18, 19, have nothing to add. You've probably got some experience, and there are people in your network. And if you're on LinkedIn, there's some value there. But if you think about a few kind of really specific things in how you network, these are things that have helped me. So number one, remember that people are inclined to help. So even if you're asking for help, you can return it in one way or another, but that person is probably more inclined to help if you're clear with what your intent is and you help them help you, right? So let's say you're emailing someone that you've never spoken to, right? You're not going to immediately ask them for a job offer. You're probably not even going to ask them for a referral to the hiring manager. But you might say, well, I'm interested in the consulting industry and I'd be curious as to what your experience is. And so now you're offering yourself as an audience to them, and people do enjoy talking about themselves. So that's not so bad. I would start with people that you know and figure out who they know, and then go to the people that you know and help them make that connection. Because again, like if you come to me and you say, Jeremy, I'd really like you to introduce me to Steve, right? Okay, why? And what do you want me to say to Steve to help you? If it's just you want to know the pros and cons of what the company is, that's great, but don't make me guess at that. Because if you know what you want and you can help me make that connection for you, it's that much easier. It'll be that much faster for me to just execute on forward on the email or call up Steve and say, hey, Deepak wants to ask you a couple questions about how you got into consulting and why you chose company A versus B. Those are some really specific things that I learned as a salesperson in asking for referrals and networking connections that really worked for me in the past. So I hope they help.
I'll just add one more point to that. I think follow-up to an introduction is really very important. I don't know that if many people do it these days, people differently react to it, but to me, that's a selling point.
I would definitely agree. I think if you say that you're gonna send someone a LinkedIn request or a note to connect afterwards, you better do it. Like it makes a huge difference. Like I attended a couple events previously in the last couple of months, and I've had really good conversation with students at Babson, and they said they were going to reach out, and not all of them did, and it makes that one step big of a difference. It makes me more inclined to help you if you actually are also putting in the work and making sure that you want it.
That's kind of been my experience
Yeah.
from. Go ahead, sorry.
So I was going to say, adding on to that, being clear with the messaging and LinkedIn, I mean, we're all kind of guilty of whether it's, hey, I forgot to send a LinkedIn request, or I sent it, but I didn't add a note on. Being clear in the communication, I think is a big deal. When I get a LinkedIn request from somebody that maybe I met them at an event, I might not remember, but if they said, hey, thanks for spending 5 minutes with me at this event, as I said, I'd like to connect with you on LinkedIn, it means the world to me that they took just 10 seconds to add a note and not just the LinkedIn request. Unless I'm standing right next to you and you say, hey, I'm going to use the app and send you a LinkedIn request right now, that's kind of the only excuse for not adding a note to say why you're sending me an invitation. Maybe it's just my pet peeve, but I think it goes for any communication, just reminding the person, and again, it's helping them help you. And networking does work. I got this job because I went to a spotlight event from CCD where an Altman Solon Babson alum attended. I sent him a follow-up email and said, hey, can I ask you a few questions about your experience? He said, sure. We talked for 15 minutes. he actually had a question for me that he thought, he was kind of concerned about my commute. So he referred me to somebody else who had a lengthy commute there. They talked to me. They both said, send your application. I'm pretty sure that greased the skids for me to get through the interview process, or at least to the second round. So CCD and networking is what I credit to me getting this job.
Yeah, same here. I got fast forwarded to the final rounds of interview during the Babson Connect of the one before COVID, at Boston, like in Boston. So to Jeremy's point, like if you make an impression, it makes a big difference.
Awesome. I hope everyone in the audience is listening if they plan to connect with you after. So on that note, right, with networking, look, prior to the pandemic, it was easier to network, right? There would be events happening in college or outside. You would go meet people and follow up with them later. That's not happening as much now. There are still virtual events happening like these, but it's not as interactive, right? So if somebody reached out to you, if a student reached out to any of the three of you and said that, I'm interested in consulting, would you have a moment for a phone call? Would you mind helping me out? Even though you haven't met them before because they might not have gotten the opportunity. Is the takeaway here that they should be as specific as possible with what they're asking for? Would you give them that time? That's kind of what I'm asking. Any one of you?
I'll just say any Babson student. So you see this flag over my shoulder, right? So I'm a Babson undergrad alum. I've been a long-time volunteer. I was vice president of the Alumni Association for 4 years and on the board of directors for 6. I'm a very, very active member of the community. So without a doubt, any fellow Babson alum, even if I don't know you, I'll take the call. I might not accept the LinkedIn invitation without a note, but I'll take the call. And honestly, there is a lot of that same alma mater connection in the industry. I've seen. I just talked to one of my peer mentors here at Altman Solon, and he was talking about the interview process he was going through, or he was helping one of his fellow S.C. Johnson school at Cornell alums, right? So he's kind of helping that person through the interview process. Same thing here. I've referred a number of people through for their application and hopefully interviews. So yes, I think that the Babson connection is strong. We're a small school, but we're pretty mighty. And you see that a lot in the space.
No, 100%. Of course, we're always here to help out. But, just keep in mind, we all have 24 hours in a day, right? We're trying to juggle between busy lives and work and whatnot. So, but to your point, if you're concise and specific about what you want and what you're looking to get out, 15 to 20 minutes, or even a half an hour, or it might even be an hour of conversation, depends how it goes.
Awesome. So on that point, Mile, you just said how busy you guys generally are with your job. So the next question I had is kind of on that. We learn a lot about consulting in theory, but since y'all are here, we'd like to know from you, what's your day like? Just a quick snapshot, like how many hours you work, and just generally, what do you do during that day? A typical work day.
I'll give you an example. You never know. You can plan on having a normal day, but it never ends up being a normal day. Just a real life example, the last quarter of last year, I was on 5 different projects, 2 work streams in each project, and I could barely sleep. But now coming out into the new year, that workload has reduced, closed out some of those projects. So, I have, let's say, 20 hours a week of billable hours, which in consulting is pretty decent. But again, you start out your week with plan, and it never ends up the way you've planned it. There's always scenarios, always things you got to jump in. And one of the biggest challenges that I'm noticing now is working with clients is fun, but also challenging because you have project plans, you have milestones, you have timelines. And in my 2 years, I remember maybe once or twice where we've closed out a project as we've planned on day one. So there's always, pushing things out, flexibilities, managing priorities. I guess that's part of the fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's day by day. I mean, I never know like what is coming my way in advance. So I could be like last quarter around Thanksgiving, I was working 16-hour plus days, maybe something crazy like that, where you're just like I worked across 3 different time zones, like West Coast of the US, East Coast, and with Europe. So you never know. You can wake up at 6 in the morning, 5 in the morning, and end your day like 10 p.m., 11 p.m., things like that. But then you have days where you end your day at like 2 p.m. and you don't have that much work that day, and you can take it easy and make up for what you had. So there is no typical day. It's very dependent on the projects you're on, the clients you're on, what they demand, all the internal work you do for the company as well. You have to factor that in. Sometimes there's loads to do, and sometimes there isn't. So there in consulting, as much as you learn a lot, it's also very unpredictable. So don't go into that field expecting a 9 to 5 day or a very set amount of hours per week. Like that's not going to happen. You can get a 1 week where you work 80 hours and then another week where you work 30 hours. And you'll never know which one you'll get until you get it.
Yeah, I'll echo what what both of them had said. Right, one of the great things about this job is that every day is different, and yes, some days can be long. A lot of days are short. I will use the ride the wave analogy because my peer coach used that with me a few months back when I was kind of complaining of how late we were, and the partners kept doing this to us, like, why can't we just pick one direction and go and finish the work? And he said, look, like, just, I know it's late, ride the wave. And he was right, because out of the next 2 weeks, I probably worked 4 days. There's definitely a balance of whether it's the type of project, because we have different types of projects where some you burn hot and heavy for 2 weeks and then you've got a couple days off. We've got others where you work 6 to 8 weeks steady, 8 to 10 hours a day, and it's fairly predictable and routine. Lots of different skills that you'll use on one project, and other projects you're just doing the same thing. That's the nature, I think, of every different consulting firm has different ways of handling that beast, if you will. But yeah, you'll be kind of all over the place, and you'll grow as a person, and you'll whine a little bit, and you'll vent, and you'll have your peers that started the same time as you, and you're all kind of having the same conversation. It'll feel a lot like your first few days of grad school. It'll feel like your first few days of freshman year or whatever in college, where, like, what did I get myself into? And then you kind of get your groove. And then hopefully, then you get promoted and you start all over.
And you take on more workload.
So how do you guys manage I mean, there is no work-life balance, of course, but how do you make time then for yourself or for your family?
Again, go ahead, Jeremy.
All right, I'll take it only because, and this is just an assumption, but I think I'm the oldest out of the three of us, and I do have 2 children. So first of all, having the support of my wife, I'll give her credit even though she's not listening. You have to carve out time for yourself, and I wasn't very good at that the first probably 4 months because I wanted to be, a go-getter, and I wanted to show how how hard I work, how smart I am, how valuable I can be to the company, and that's great. But I did at some point need to just stop and say, wait a minute, like one of the silver linings of COVID is I don't have much of a commute. But the opposite of that is there's no real expectation that we're going to stop working. And there's no one that says, oh, it's 5 o'clock. We should stop for a break. It's 6 o'clock. Why don't you go get some food? Nope. You'll just work right through until everybody else is done. And, oh, you fell asleep at your desk again. Great. You have to carve out time for yourself. And one of the great things about this job is when you have, I'll say when you're on a project where you're confident in how long it's going to take you to do something, which it probably, depending on your skill set, it might take a while to get there. When you can accurately estimate how long it's going to take you to do something, you probably end up not really caring what time of day you do it unless somebody else is depending on you. So if you want to start work at 7 and then take a 2-hour break, great. If you want to not start work until 10 and you want to get your workout done in the morning, or you got to drop your kids off, or you got to pick them up or whatnot, carve out that time, communicate with your team, whatever the work stream of the day and who's depending on what, just communicate with them. And most people are pretty flexible and they're doing the same thing, because especially the ones that have more experience at it, they absolutely understand how valuable it is to have your personal time, to balance out life. Different firms, I think, have different models on what that looks like. And I know that there's definitely been a lot of efforts, at least here at Altman Solon, on making a better work-life balance, particularly for new hires coming out of the MBA program, because we don't have the skill sets of the people who have grown up as analysts and junior consultants. So we're really, we're missing on some other things, but we have really high expectations on what we can do. But we have value that we can add if they just tap it in the right way. So there's been a lot of work that's been done to improve the work-life balance and help us understand. They don't really expect us, I guess, to be good at the job for quite some time, but as long as we're communicating on where our confidence level is on the task that's assigned to us, if there's any questions we're not sure about, we're coming back to them quickly, we're getting feedback quickly, they're pretty good about that. And that's one of the things that helps create more room for personal life stuff where, okay, hey, I need to take this time off, but I've gotten it to this point. Can I hand it to somebody else and I'll pick it up at the other side?
Awesome. But just looking back now, is for the three of you, are there any skills that you wish you had pursued a bit more while you were in college? It'll be very helpful for those of us who are still in college to know that now. Mila, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. I think it depends in which field of consulting you end up. Starting out as a freshly minted MBA, you're leveraging knowledge from MMSP, Manage and Measure Strategic Performances. On some projects, you leverage knowledge from the supply chain class that what's his name? He was Sinan. He was teaching that class.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I couldn't really give you a specific example, but the more you become proficient with Microsoft Office, those PowerPoint, Excel, Word skills will really help you in the beginning, will make your life easier. And then as you move along, you kind of pick up some of the subject matter expertise.
Yeah, I'll echo that on Microsoft Excel, because even coming out of undergrad and in my prior career, I did a bit of PowerPoint, but nothing really with Excel to speak of. That was definitely something I wish I had taken more of, like looking at, okay, what's the investment banker track look like for learning Microsoft Excel, for modeling? because there are so many different formulas and setups and expectations of how the client is going to interpret the data and the analysis and the charting and all that. So Excel was the big one for me. That's the one I'm still working on. The next step beyond that would be Tableau, but most of our clients aren't even there yet. We have a specialized team that focuses on Tableau, but if you can get there, it's an advantage. It makes you that much faster. But Excel is definitely the big one. If you want a list of formulas, ping me afterward. I'll gladly share.
Yeah. To echo both Mile and Jeremy, I think any visualization tools are extremely helpful. So, like Tableau, like Miro, PowerPoints, Excels, just everything helps a lot. I think I used to be very decent with Excel and PowerPoint and everything, but I think the skills that you need for consulting takes it a step further because you're doing PowerPoints every single day. Like it's the number one way to visualize what you have to say. So you really need to be more than just proficient. Like you need to understand how to manipulate everything that you're trying to do on PowerPoint. And it's not very intuitive because there's so many different layers to PowerPoint that I didn't know of before I started that I know now. And I'm still learning. I'm not even close to being an expert in PowerPoint. And it helps a lot. And then I would say outside of that, I think if you can learn how to code or do some kind of software development, just IT related skills, I don't necessarily use them for the consulting work that I do right now, but I'm realizing it sure would have been helpful to know some of the coding languages, and it makes your life easier, I think, on some projects and some work in general.
Awesome. Whole bunch of things to learn. So,
by the way, there's this Wall Street Prep package of online resources that I would highly recommend you take advantage of. It goes through a crash course on PowerPoint, Excel, modeling. It's a really good learning resource.
Excellent. We looked that up right after. So there's
Deepak, just I have a question.
Yeah.
Actually, if I get a call from company, an interview call, maybe for internship or maybe for job, then what the interview looks like? What should I prepare?
I'm sorry, can you clarify the question?
Yeah, if I get a call from any consulting industry for internship or for any job opportunity, then what would you guys suggest that how should I prepare, or what are the things I should take care so that?
I mean, it depends on the level of interview, right? If it's a first round, a phone screening, if it's an on-site interview, and then if it's a final round, which is more of a soft skill measurement interview, right? The first phone screen is just to make sure that you're a real person, you're not artificial intelligence. And then the second one, obviously, is the case interview, which measures your analytical communication skills. And I think that's like the biggest filter, in my opinion. And then the third round, which is meeting the managing partner, is just to make sure that whether or not you'll be able to fit into the team. And how do you prepare? Again, depending on the level of interview, just make sure you have an interesting story, because that's what people, particularly in consulting, want to hear something unique about yourself, something that they haven't heard, seen, or learned before, right? If you go into consulting, you most likely enjoy learning new things. So just keep that in mind.
So there are two questions which I think we can kind of combine into one. The first one is the difference between specialist and general consulting, and the second question is why do companies still need consultants, right? Because we see that during the pandemic, companies cut. That's the one thing that companies cut very quickly: the cost for consultants. And our understanding is that it's because by the time you give a recommendation and they implement it, the results, it's lagging. It takes time. So on that note, if you guys could just tell us how you feel about that. Why companies still need consultants and the difference.
Yeah, Professor Carr actually had an interesting take on this. And this is pre-COVID, where he said that consulting is one of those spaces that it's not recession-proof by any stretch, because it can sometimes be the first place to get cut, but it also can be the first place to come back because it's less expensive than internal resources. So
Yep.
I think companies need consultants for a couple of different reasons. The first one is to tell them that they're right in what they think they want to do, but to what degree? How much should they do X, Y, or Z that they think they want to do? And the more obvious one that they don't hear enough internally is that they're wrong, and to what degree. Because it's a lot less expensive to throw, call it $50,000, $500,000, $5 million at a consulting engagement and figure out that you're wrong than it is to completely change your company's strategy and go down the wrong black hole for a long, long time. And maybe that's more specific to a strategy consulting firm like Altman Solon compared to management consulting. But I think some of those aspects would hold true in management consulting.
I would agree. And just to kind of decouple the questions a little bit. So I would say being a specialist in something would, for example, taking the skills that I was talking about in coding and being specifically an analytics consultant. At PA, we have a division for that, where you specialize in like Java and R and Stata and things like that, like languages like these. And you just focus on manipulating data and looking at it and just trying to extrapolate what it means. So that would, to me, that means that's like a very specific field within consulting that is data analytics and just analytics. But a generalist is what we touched on a bit earlier, right? Like you need to be a person that enjoys learning, because consulting is, you don't know the problem that you're going to get from the client when you jump on the project, right? So you have to be ready to learn as much as you have to be ready to guide, because it might be a new topic to you. There are going to be specialist consultants on your team that know exactly what's going on, but to you, it might be something that is completely new. So you're learning as much as the client along the way. And you're trying to convince them that you're the expert in the room, right? So that's like the generalist side of consulting, like just taking that learning curve and learning it faster than the client so you can explain it to the client. And then why do companies need consulting? I mean, they need us for a lot of things. I mean, the list is huge, right? But to Jeremy's point, sometimes we come in to either solve problems, guide them on something, recommend them on something, or we back up the decisions that they want. So sometimes senior leadership teams need the backing of an external entity to go to the board and say, hey, look, we were right, this is the way to go. But to Jeremy's point, it could be the complete opposite, and we can go in and tell them, hold on a second, what you're trying to do is not going to get you there, right? So I would say it's just a lot of problem solving and answering the homework, answering that homework question, that exam question. Clients are very specific to what their needs are, and we have to make sure that we hit that. And it's a lot of problem solving, just thinking and taking
I'll
it
just
from them.
I'll just add one more point to the generalist consultant. I don't know about the specialist because I haven't had exposure in that area, but what I enjoy about the generalist is that I work with subject matter experts with over 20 years of experience in a particular matter, right? and I get to learn from those folks. And that's pretty awesome, if you ask me. Now, if I were to be a specialist, you're probably focused in one functional area, in one particular space, and you're developing a deep area knowledge. So you got to find your edge. You got to find what interests you.
And most of the time, to Mila's point, you start off as a generalist anyways. So there's rarely a company that will hire you as a specialist unless you have some, 10, 15 years of experience in a field, and then they'll hire you as a specialist in that field or a subject matter expert. But I think in the stage of where I am at, or recent grads and undergrad or grads, or just business school, graduate school, 100% you'll go in as a generalist and you'll try to learn a lot of different capabilities, a lot of different fields. And then you decide along the way, like, what sounds interesting to you, what do you like, and you start developing the skills that you need for it. And over time, you become a specialist. But you'll definitely start off as a generalist.
Is it frustrating when you give a recommendation to a client and they don't implement it, or are you just like at this point, like numb to it? Like does it?
It depends. It
Yeah.
depends, right? I think that, so two things. One, it depends on why they made the decision to do it if you said not to, or to not do it if you think it's a great idea, and how strong was your data versus your assumptions, how confident were you in where you were going, how clear was the recommendation, and how strong was the relationship. Because you may find that, look, you're making a recommendation to someone who vastly outranks you with experience in the industry, and they might look at it and say, I appreciate it, this is good analysis, I'm going to do this, I'm going to take what you said into consideration, but I'm going to do it differently. And that's okay. If they say, this is terrible, you made a mistake, right? Because we've had, I've only been here seven months, but I've done a number of projects where you get to the end of the conversation and you get the sense that they're going to do what they wanted to do anyways, but you gave them something to think about. And now they're going to pull on that string a little bit deeper, a little bit further, and that might change the direction. All right, they're still going to take a left, but it's not going to be 90 degrees. It's going to be 75 degrees. And so maybe they'll find a path that's okay. And if you have a long-term relationship with them, it might be okay that they went in that direction, because they're going to come back and say, I really should have listened to you. Let's do another deal, because this time I'm going to listen harder.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask the last question before I open. I'm sorry, do you have anything to add?
I was going to say,
Yeah.
And clients are notorious for sometimes not knowing what they actually want. So as the job of a consultant, you really have to make sure that you're asking the right questions to get the need of the client that they actually want. So, because sometimes they tell you like they want X, but they actually mean Y, and you can't operate under the assumption that they want X when in reality everything's pointing to Y, right? So you really have to make sure that you know what they need and what they want in order to present to them something that they will use at the end of the day as well. And sometimes they just don't use it, but you did your job and you gave it to them. But in their best interest, they spend a lot of money on consultants. So if they don't use it, then it's a lot of money wasted, if you ask me. So
It's part of the job, part of
Yeah.
the game, right?
So I'm going to ask the last question before we open it up. I understand that we're kind of running late. How do you establish credibility? So, a lot of credibility comes from experience. And if any one of us gets into consulting, for let's say a small boutique firm, and when we go and meet the client, how do you establish some sort of credibility?
So I got two things to say to that. Number one, listen, right? You listen, you find out what's really important, what's really happening, understand, make them feel listened to. And then I just took this note off of my wall because I took notes when I was still in school from Ken Dema. I don't know if anybody's taken any of his classes, but we were talking about consulting, and he gave me the 4 A's: aptitude, so gain knowledge quickly; attitude, be client focused; agility, because speed matters; and altitude, know what level you are at. And sometimes that last one is the hardest one to figure out. The level of the conversation you're having and how important it is to know different things, or just have a candid conversation on what you don't know. But listening, stewards, fake it till you make it. Again, altitude depends on where you are in the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to hand it over to Abhishek now. And Abhishek, can you just see if there are any questions on the chat? If somebody wants to ask a question, could you just moderate that, please? And thank you again to the three of you. Great answers today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I would tell everybody that, if you have any questions, you could just, raise your hands so that I can moderate it. And I just had a question, just because everybody is talking about technical skills and all those skills, I am a little bit more concerned about, I would say, soft skills. It's like when you are asking the company to give you information which you really need, but they aren't willing to share. So sometimes you have to extract that information. So did you develop your soft skills with any certain courses, or, it developed over time by talking with people and obviously, getting into these engagements more and more?
I think that goes back to Jeremy's point about attitude. So even it goes back to your interview phase to even get the consulting job. So the interviewers don't expect you to be a specialist by any means or an expert at all, but you have to show that you're willing to, one, admit when you don't know something, admit when you're wrong, and be ready and have the right attitude to show that you want to learn. Even if it's something that you've never heard about before, you have to show that you're eager and interested in that subject matter. And it has to be genuine. When it's not genuine, it's very noticeable. So, and that carries on from your first interview onto your first client work, right? You have to know, again, like the right questions to ask just to get the information that you can take and go use to look for what they want. And it's a lot of that. You're not going to be an expert in a lot of the things that you consult on, but you have to be open to learning. And if you're not open to ambiguity in general, then I don't know if consulting is the right field for you, because it's a lot of new topics that you learn on a day-to-day basis in everything that you do.
So help me, were you trying to understand how to develop your soft skills, or was it a different question?
Even the soft skills, or I would also say like in the future interactions with the clients, when you have to ask them, how to extract data from within their company. They might be having some internal data, or they might be doing their own research, but they always want your external perspective on some things. So it's like sometimes you have to, extract that data. So how would you suggest how to do
Right.
that?
To be quite frank, I've never had issues obtaining the information that we seek from the client. They're 99% readily available to give you everything they have for you to help them out and provide insights. It helps if you're from with our firm, we get involved with particular accounts in a lot of different fields and with a lot of functions. So it helps in that way to build the knowledge base for a client, because if you're involved in helping them out with putting putting a supply chain strategy, putting a roadmap for their first product launch, et cetera, then you get to build that knowledge base. But to the earlier point, excuse me, I've never encountered issues getting that information from them.
Okay, thank you. So I have one question in the chat, which is regarding the case interview process. Obviously, initially it was in person before COVID. So he's just asking about how the process has changed now. So can you expand on that question, Stuart, if you would like to?
Yeah, I think I'm just curious about what the dynamic is like now that it's a virtual interview. A lot of the takeaways that interviewers might want from a case is how you're comfortable in managing that question on the spot. So I'm curious if you guys have heard any stories from recent hires who have gone through this process during COVID.
I'll give you a general impression because I've witnessed a couple, sort of shadowed, doing some of our HR team is actually training us on how to do the other side of the interview so that we, A, do a good job, B, do it fairly. Everything is Zoom, right? Everything's Zoom or WebEx, virtual. You're still face-to-face with people. So a lot of that is still part of the process. I think that it's an advantage personally because I think you can tape up a lot of stuff like right there where they can't see it on the camera, but those end up just being confidence builders more than anything you actually have the time to really access in the middle of a case. But it was always my style to do that when I was in sales and in prepping for interviews is to kind of make sure that I felt comfortable in the space as much as possible. I had my stuff with me. The conversations are pretty much the same, right? You're just having them electronically, virtually. They're used to that by now, or we're used to that by now. There's definitely been some differentiation in virtual backgrounds. So I've actually been impressed by the people who will put, school logo up in one place and half their resume in another. And I'm like, that's pretty good. But they want to be able to see that you can execute on the conversation more than just, okay, do you have a nice background or whatever? But there's still an opportunity to differentiate.
Thank you, Jeremy. So anyone else who is having a question, he can ask it now, he or she.
And just one additional point.
Okay,
at
please.
least my experience so far has been the thought process matters more than getting the actual answer. So it doesn't matter.
Yep.
One of my cases for my interview and that PA loves to ask is actually a case that has no right answer. So a lot of consulting firms sometimes do that, where they give you cases that have multiple ways that you can get to completely different things. And it doesn't really matter which one you get to, as long as everything in between the starting point at the end point makes sense and you can back it up logically. And you have to be ready that if you get to the end, that sometimes the person sitting in front of you will tell you you're wrong. And here's why you're wrong. And I'm going to show you why you're wrong. And in that case, they just want you to acknowledge that, okay, maybe I need to rethink my approach and tackle it differently. And that happens a lot. And the reason why it happens in interviews is because that happens a lot during client projects. Clients, if you're on the wrong track, they will not wait and tell you like at the end of the project, right? So sometimes you have to pivot in between. So it's the thought process that counts a lot more than your final result.
Thank you. Perfect. Anybody else wants to ask any question, please go ahead. So
I'm going to ask one more.
okay.
So I know two of the three of you haven't been doing this for way too long, but given your experience so far, would you choose this field again? Would you do it all over again?
Yeah.
Fair question.
Yeah.
Right? Yes.
I'd follow Raid's path. I would do it immediately after undergrad. Like I would have done it 15 years earlier. I wish I'd just gotten into it earlier. The opportunities, the doors it opens, the learning experience. Yes, it is harder being 15 years older than everybody else. Not impossible, and I certainly bring some things to the table that they don't. It's just the first year, like I got to get over the fact that I don't know some of the stuff that they know now, but they're 15 years behind me on life experience, so I got that going for me. But I would definitely, I've enjoyed it. It's been a great challenge. I've learned a ton. I would start earlier.
Awesome. Thank you.
Deepak, if I could build on that question, and this is, I guess, more for Jeremy and Mile, given your backgrounds. Sorry, Rayed. What do you feel was the most transferable skill that gave you a strong start from day one of the job that came beyond consulting?
The number one skill was those communication skills that you develop by having customer exposure, client exposure in your previous career. Just being able to speak to people, quote unquote, helps out by making that genuine connection and sounding interested in the problems, in their issues, from a business perspective, right? Will take you far. Those, I guess, soft skills, I would say.
I just put it in the
Great,
chat.
thank you.
The communication skills definitely, but I'd add desire to learn, right? Asking questions, knowing that the learning curve is going to be there, and the faster I can speed up the process, the better. Finding different tips and tricks, finding different resources, asking different people. That's where the communication comes in. I think that when I recognized some of the gaps that I had in Excel in particular, and started asking around for like, hey, who knows how to do this? And I created a kind of a running list of things I didn't know how to do. And then I went and figured it out so that the next time I saw it, I didn't have to ask again and I wasn't taking as long. That desire to learn, and then being able to kind of not make the same mistake more than 2 or 3 times because I eventually got there.
And one skill that Babson sets you up pretty well for is learning how to work with others. That's huge. Consulting is teamwork times a million. It's all teamwork. I have yet to work on something alone in the 5-6 months I've worked at BA so far, because it's a lot of project-based delivery, right? So take all you learn from Babson when it comes to that, like working in teams, learning how to navigate and work with people that might be not on the same wavelength, or learning new work styles from others, things like that, right? Like these skills, they might not be very obvious to you that they're important, but they're huge. They're huge in consulting.
Yeah, collaboration, definitely.
I had one more question actually. So, looking back now, when you applied for a job with the interview process, is there something you wish you would have pushed back a bit more on? Like
compensation.
That's fair.
That was a joke, by the way. Go ahead, finish your question.
I mean, you could. Why not? No, it's just. I think, given the situation, a lot of people, when they interview, they're gonna just be like, okay, they're just so grateful for the opportunity, but later you look back and you're like, oh, you know what? I could have pushed back with this or with that. Just curious if you guys face that situation, and in hindsight, you were like, I mean, it's specific. It doesn't necessarily have to have taken place, but if it did, I would like to hear more about that.
I'll give you my one thing. And it's gonna sound kind of weird, and it's not really all that negative. I was a little concerned about, like, all right, I'm older than the classmates I'm gonna start with, right? And I've never been in consulting before, so I don't want to be behind. I don't want to be behind. In the interview process, I probably asked every single person I met at the company and at other companies, like, what could I do to get better at the job faster? And everyone said, nothing. Don't worry about it. One person said, well, you could read some industry materials and, but don't worry about it. Nope. There was a ton of stuff I could have done. And there was plenty of time. And now the pandemic happened, so that actually changed literally the world. But there was a gap between May and July when I started that I was planning on having this window of time. I could have done some reading, done some learning, attended online classes, whatever it was. And so that's where I would have filled the gap with an Excel class or two. That's where I would have gone online and paid for Tableau. It would have absolutely been worth it. Yes, reading industry materials because we're specific to a couple of industries, that would have helped, but not nearly as much as picking up on some of the Excel skills. And again, that's me because I didn't have that background. Beyond that, I might have been just a little bit too grateful for the opportunity and the fact that it didn't disappear once the pandemic hit. I wasn't going to push back on anything.
Yeah,
That
time.
helped. Thanks, Jeremy. That helped.
So,
I,
all right.
I don't know if it's pushing back per se, but I'll give you at least something that was eye-opening from my interview process. The last interview I had was with a consultant at PA that was at the company for over 20 years. So she had, tremendous experience within consulting and within her specific field and all of that. But what was very interesting to me is that I realized that afterwards, like retrospectively looking at that interview, is I'm the one that drove that conversation more than she actually did. And the reason I say that was because the topics that we talked about were more things that I knew about, were more about my interests and my skills than her focus. And the conversation went in that direction because she was interested in one of those areas. And that area for me was, for example, the intersection between psychology and tennis and how it's mentally like just challenging for tennis players on the court, because I competed in tennis my whole life. And it turned out that she was a huge tennis fan. And for 10-15 minutes of that interview, the conversation was about topics that weren't necessarily about tennis, but related to it. So it was something that I knew more about than she did. And that helped a lot. So you might think that they're the expert in the room, but look for the opportunities where you can flip that conversation to where you're the expert and they're listening to you learning. Because if they learn from an interview that they're giving, the chances are so much higher that they're going to hire you afterwards.
Hey guys, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to have to get going now. It's been great to meet everyone. Great to chat with you. Find me on LinkedIn Connect, and happy to help in whichever way I can. Good luck to all of you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bilay.
Thank you so much for being here today.
All right, bye-bye.
All right. So, guys, I don't think there is any other question in the chat itself. So, I would just like to thank you, Raid and Jeremy, because they have been here. They are always helping. They have been in Connect events too. So you guys could reach out to them and, ask for their help. But, like they said, approach them in the right way rather than just asking for the job. So that's one thing. And thank you very much, guys, for coming in and helping us out. And we would love to see you more on the campus sometime in future, I would say. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming in.
And
Thanks for having me.
And I think I was not wrong when I said a ton of experience, because here, what I could hear, it was really amazing and insightful. And we thoroughly enjoyed the session. Thank you all.
Thank you everyone for
Thank-
showing up.
Thanks so much.
Have a
Thank you
great
guys.
weekend.
That was really great. And now you can see why I wasn't on camera. I have 2 little kids listening and screaming, but you guys are great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Ride.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for having me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
This is a great event, you guys. Well done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
Woo! Be faster. Yay!
Congratulations to the club.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you for
Exciting.
asking the questions. I know I put you in a uncomfortable spot with some personal stuff there, but you played it well. I was
Thank you.
feeding him questions, guys, and I was like, "Hey, if you're comfortable, ask these questions." He's like, "No, I'm not asking."
Yeah, some of them are very personal.
Feel
I'm
free.
not
Feel
gonna
free
It
to
was
ask anything.
Well, okay. To be fair, I asked like, okay, Raid had said some stuff about like, working 80 hours, and I was like, okay, this is not going well. I'm not like working 80 hours with 2 kids. So then I was like, oh, like, do these people have kids? Do they have wives? Do their wives work?
Yanni, we can close the recording.
Yes.
Oh, oops. Yeah, you
Yeah.
should take that off of